Hi, and welcome back to the Self-Actualization in the Age of Crisis chapter summary series. I'm your host, Ron Rivers, and today we're going to be discussing Chapter 3, Economy, Labor, and Property. So when we think about reimagining our economic, labor, and property laws in relation to systemic actualization, we really begin with a very specific question. What kind of individual can exist and thrive within the systemic arrangements we inhabit in our immediate present? Now, today, that answer is a very specific and limited type of person, right? A person who takes a very specific form. Systemic actualization changes the answer to an ever-increasing variety of people. The idea being that through the elevation of our collective floor, we radically expand both the degrees and frequency that individuals can imagine. Ultimately, the laws surrounding our economics, labor, and property define who is and is not an insider and an outsider within society. Now, let's also talk about some specific definitions just to kind of set the context for this chapter and the following subchapters. You'll hear the word economy. Okay, what an economy refers to is a series of transactions that are essentially repeatable. So we can talk about markets in relation to an economy. Markets are specific verticals of transactions. So, for example, we might say a housing market or an agricultural market, which would summarize all food transactions, and it could even be obviously divided into further subsets. When we talk about the economy or economies, we typically refer to the total amount of transactions either within all markets or the specific markets we're referring to. So if we say the agricultural economy, we're talking about all transactions related to the movement, development, sourcing, growth, etc. of food. Now, today we inhabit sets of legal arrangements that prioritize a very specific and static form of transaction, which also deeply integrates to our possibilities of labor. So we can start by just identifying that the very notion of inhabiting a static and singular version, legal frameworks to kind of support our cooperation is in its very nature antithetical to the single truth in the relational universe, right? It's out of alignment with nature. And one of the struggles is that most economics is measured in the relationship between productivity and debt. Those are two key indicators. But as we've seen time and time again, those numbers are easily manipulatable, and it's very difficult for the lay individual to really kind of grasp these concepts if you're not really kind of deeply diving into the numbers. So that in itself kind of furthers our crisis of information, truth, and trust. Now, in Chapter 1, we discussed the crisis of the billionaire God King of the 21st century and why legal frameworks and our legal organization that prioritizes the dissemination of power to small groups of oligarchs is a net negative for society. And what's important to really kind of frame our discussion of economy, labor, and property with is the laws supporting our transaction in these verticals are filled with inequities by design. So the laws actually support the proliferation of new inequities as well as the maintenance of existing ones. All of it to really further and concentrate power at the top. I also want to emphasize from the start that while we can identify and critique the flaws of our existing systems, we must at the same time not fall prey to what is very common in many of the politically active spheres of society today, which is the wholesale substitution of one system for another. So, for example, substituting capitalism for socialism or capitalism for a theocratic authoritarianism. No individualism is going to save us. And ultimately, when we consider our systemic arrangements and systemic actualization through the lens of the single truth in the relational universe, we focus on a pluralism. That is to say, a wide variety of legal constructs and laws and forms of operation that operate simultaneously side by side depending on their specific vertical. I also want to emphasize that the very idea of eliminating a form of living, a form of transaction, a form of cooperation, removing that option from people is antithetical to our spiritual and systemic project. The entire vision of systemic actualization is, and really self-actualization in the age of crisis, is developing a human being who is free to direct their time experience without conflict, right, from the systems surrounding them or the others, and really kind of create in their own vision, right, to become more godlike by expressing their divinity in the moment. So the very nature that we should outlaw some form of transaction to support another is not going to solve anything, and it's in many ways contributing to the same problem that we're trying to overcome. Now, I'll just note these chapters in systemic actualization are a little bit more dense than the individual actualization chapters, so it's going to be tough for a full summary in these kind of short clips. So I do recommend you read the book or check out the audio book. But I'll conclude just by stating that the reimagine of the laws surrounding economy, labor, and property are fundamental to the project of systemic actualization. And until we do so, we'll forever be locked in this kind of singular version of transaction and cooperation that ultimately diminishes the human spirit.